If you were with us yesterday, you may have heard it was a pretty interesting phone call from a woman who was talking about electric automobiles. And she thought that that would be a subject that could be broached with some of our state legislators in Boise. Now, I know that there was a discussion already among some of the legislators about allowing these, I may have the name wrong, smart cars. These are the automobiles that drive themselves. Allow testing of them here in the state. They're doing it already in California. People have been driving down roads seeing these driverless cars, and they've been stopping and taking photographs of them, posting it to the internet. So it's not like it's a secret. It's taking place in some other places. So we're doing some of that testing, and I would assume too as well that the goal is I think if you can build an automobile that's safe and it does not run on gasoline, it doesn't have an internal combustion engine, I think that you likely are probably going to be allowed to operate that vehicle, whether it be electric, whether it be a hydrogen powered car, a compressed air powered car. I've seen some of these automobiles that have been designed to run on natural gas. I actually was at a state fair one time. A guy popped the trunk on a Civic, this tiny little Civic, and in the trunk they had placed a propane tank, and it was running on propane. So you have a lot of options people are still working on out there. I think, though, that the internal combustion engine is going to be with us, likely, for another 50 years, unless somebody comes up with some really genius idea to replace it. And to replace it in a commercially successful way. That means it's affordable to the buying public. We're going to be dealing with going to the gas pumps for a long, long time to come. But her thoughts actually got me talking yesterday about a company called Tesla Motors, where they are manufacturing, and not in a very big way yet, electric automobiles. These are more boutique style cars that people are driving. In fact, wealthy Hollywood celebrities are the main market. But let's be honest, with 300 some odd million people in the United States, they do not comprise a very big buying block, if you look at it that way. So today in the Wall Street Journal, a fellow by the name of Holman W. Jenkins Jr. is writing a column about this very same car. And Elon Musk is the guy's name who is the CEO of Tesla Motors. He said he has proved that a market exists for electric cars, despite their many inconveniences, especially if they come wrapped in taxpayer subsidies. He hasn't proved he can make a profit, he goes on to write. His idea of an industry at scale, he would probably be loath to admit, almost certainly depends on government intervention to make gasoline-powered cars increasingly prohibited. In fact, the very same man was on a talk show a couple of weeks ago talking about his Tesla Motors, and he was saying it was a really good idea to build this company up, even though he's getting lots of subsidies that you and I wouldn't get if we were opening up a mainstream shop. But he's getting subsidies. He says that the federal government will at some point outlaw the internal combustion engine. But see, that's just his opinion. But it's also, if he's lobbying for that, it's good for his business, which may be the reason that he's saying that this is actually going to come about. The writer says he updated the car's software so it will constantly tell the driver if he can hope to reach his destination or the nearest charging station. When a driver gets there, though, he'll still spend hours, not minutes, filling up. Remember that. When you have to charge the automobile, unless you're going to drop another battery in it, and that would get expensive every, couple hundred miles. These batteries are not cheap. I think somebody told me to replace one of them. It's about $1,800. Now, unless they have a system where you can trade a still decent battery in for another battery, then you could quickly move on. But otherwise, you've got to stop wherever you're going, plug that automobile in, let it recharge for a good 8 hours. The writer goes on to say, as with any other car, a Tesla owner ties up thousands of dollars in a piece of equipment that sits idle 95% of the time. Think about that. Any automobile you buy, no matter what it runs on, you're not driving it 24/7. Unless you're in a business and you have a fleet and the fleet is out on the road 24/7. But just for you individually, you don't do that. Unless you're that guy that Chris Farley used to play, living in a van down by the river, I suppose. Tesla solves no problem of the automobile. He says it only creates a new problem. But the stock price is skyrocketing. And he asks, why is that happening? Well, the skyrocketing price is because investors on Wall Street believe that some larger automobile company is going to buy this guy out. So the only way Tesla becomes profitable is when it's sold. And he says part of Tesla's market value is attributable to the likelihood that it will be acquired by another car maker needing electric vehicles to offset the gasoline-powered vehicles. That is because President Obama is looking at changing what are called the CAFE standards, and that means the fleet average. If you're Ford or you're Chrysler or you're General Motors, you have to meet an average. You can still sell your big F-350s and your F-250s and your F-150s. You can sell the Silverados. You can sell the Dodge Rams. These things all use a lot of fuel. But in order to do that, you have to have automobiles within your fleet that you produce that get such high mileage on the road that that will average out the pickup trucks and the four-wheel drive vehicles you make, the big SUVs. So someone would come along and buy Tesla and say, we're going to introduce an electric vehicle to our fleet. Then that suddenly drops your average down when it comes to gasoline. But here's the rub, and this is what I brought up to the woman who called the program yesterday. What happens? How do you get all the electricity? The solar panels would have to paper the country from one end to the other to generate the electricity if we all switched to electric automobiles. We just simply can't do it. So in order to generate the electricity, we're going to have to burn oil and coal, which defeats the whole purpose, doesn't it? Coming up on 940. Mike Huckabee will be along in about 10 minutes on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Bill Colley with you this morning on Top Story. Story about guns coming up in just a few minutes. If you love the Second Amendment, you may want to hear this. A couple of weeks ago, was your own U.S. Senator Mike Crapo from here in Idaho who really started making some noise about this. You may remember that he and Senator Jim Risch joined a lot of other Senate Republicans, some from Wyoming, one from Nevada, and they were making a lot of noise about this attempt by the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives to ban certain types of ammunition. It's the end around, if you will, for the Obama administration. They would like to obviously confiscate your guns, but they know they can't get away with that. So the belief was, if we just don't supply any ammunition to people, then they'll have all of these worthless firearms around, and we'll solve the problem and get rid of them in that sense. It's not very straightforward and might be a little shady, but that was the approach that was being taken. But it's not the only attack on the Second Amendment and gun owners in this country. The Obama White House was also going after people who own gun shops, people who are in a legal business in this country. They are doing it by the book. But what was happening, and there's not a lot of cash or checks exchanged any longer in the firearms industry or in the firearms business when you're a merchant. People do most of their purchases now with plastic. That can be a debit card or it can be a credit card. The problem is that the card companies and banks were suddenly dragging their feet on a lot of this business with these people. And a lot of them were unable to keep their doors open or were in danger of having to close their shops down. And this is their livelihood. This is how they feed their families. And suddenly someone said, you know what? Something strange is going on here. Little bits of this started to trickle out. There was a guy who actually audio taped his conversation with a banker. And the banker came right out and told him, he said, the federal government has been in here and they've been telling us not to do business with you. They've been intimidating us. Well, the federal government then threatened banks for talking about it. That got the attention of Congress. Now, this is supposedly the most transparent administration in the history of the United States. At least that's what it claims. And when that was discovered, suddenly you had people in Congress standing up saying, whoa, this has got to stop. And it was called, I think it was called Chokehold or Choke Point. That was the name of it, Operation Choke Point. They thought they would shut down these legitimate businesses so that you could not get firearms in your hands or supplies in your hands if you indeed own firearms. Well, yesterday, this comes from the Heritage Foundation, which puts this out, the Daily Signal. Republicans are beginning to ask, how come no one's taking the fall for this in government? The head of the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, that is the FDIC. You know, when I was a kid, you'd go into a bank and it would say this bank is insured up to 40 grand, or your account is. The number's a lot bigger now because of inflation and the like. But the FDIC, that's when I first became aware of it, when I had my very first bank account as a paper boy when I was, 9 or 10 years old. He said during testimony before Congress Tuesday that part of the agency's involvement in Operation Choke Point was a, quote, mistake, unquote. Hey, we ruined some lives, put some people out of business, bankrupted some. It's a mistake. Somebody sitting in the chamber who was actually among the inquisitors then fired back if it was a mistake. Why has no one then been fired or held accountable? Accountability in government. That doesn't seem to happen. If you're a Democrat, you can get away with anything you want. You can have your own personal email server at home so you can handle sensitive information at the State Department and channel it through your own system so that you can hide anything that might later be embarrassing to you. Other people would go to prison for that, but you won't because, of course, you're a media darling and you're a Hollywood darling. And she's not her husband's darling, but that's a story for another day. And then the Obama White House has been complicit in this. We're also reading today that the Obama White House had a guy working at the Department of Homeland Security who was greasing the skids for immigration for certain friends of the White House, including the governor of Virginia, Terry McAuliffe, who was the old consigliere for the Clinton family back in the 1990s when he served as chair of the Democrat National Commission. Going to tell you a quick little story. I was married back about 20 years ago to a woman whose brother-in-law, her sister was married to Terry McAuliffe's first cousin. So I would see this McAuliffe fellow at a lot of family gatherings. Have you ever met somebody in life who walks up to you and talks to you and they sound like a con man, but they think you're too stupid to realize that they're conning you? They really believe that they've got a mask on. They really believe that what they're telling you, that you're believing it. That's what that guy is. That's Terry McAuliffe. He is the type of individual who will tell you the sky is pink today, even when you can look up and see it's blue. And he'll do it with a straight face because he thinks you're so gold darn stupid that you're going to believe him when he tells you that. I find that to be absolutely reprehensible. And according to the Washington Times today, he has absolutely clammed up because his political future, he barely won election in Virginia as governor a couple of years ago. So he is not sitting there on a mandate. And he has also had a lot of shady dealings in his past, business dealings that I know about through friends who were also associated with him when we used to all live in the same part of upstate New York. But the man may have some splaining to do. So may people at the White House. If the media will hold their feet to the fire, and please don't expect that to happen. The Huckabee Report is on the way and is brought to you exclusively by the financial advisors at Waddell & Reed in Twin Falls. The telephone number is 736-6563. Thank you very much, Governor Huckabee. I want to quickly mention an email I had. Our early discussion today in the 8 o'clock hour of the program dealt with people who don't vote. In fact, many people who don't vote because of their Christian faith, they've decided to stay away from the ballot box. And I got an interesting email from someone who was listening to that discussion, and he says, I've been listening to the talk on Christians not voting. He says, I'm a Christian, but feel the vote problem should be expanded, he said, to include the silent majority. He says, since the 1960s, when I first listened to politics, I've had every single Democrat tell me, quote, all politicians are corrupt, unquote. He said, if you start believing that simple thought, you're on the road to defeat. He says, President Obama is waking up the silent majority by showing the silent majority just how corrupt the liberal Democrats really are. Because this guy is in absolute agreement with me on this one. He says, I believe that Scott Walker and Ted Cruz both have that ability to wake up the Reagan Democrats in silent majority. Ted Cruz, by the way, is just getting raked over the coals by the establishment that is sometimes called mainstream media the last few days. But I saw a great piece today saying, why are they so afraid of him? He doesn't lead in any polls. He's way behind. You've got some people saying that generally the people who are ahead in the polls a year before the campaign really gets started, that that group 2 to 3 at the top will be the 2 to 3 at the top come next year. But here's the thing. In 2012, Mitt Romney, along with Newt Gingrich and Ron Paul, were all the guys in 2011 who'd been in the lead in the polls among Republicans. We got into March of 2012, and they were all still in the lead. But then all of a sudden, Romney was the only one left, and Rick Santorum came out of nowhere and made it a competition. So we could see someone like Ted Cruz, who's down in the single digits right now when it comes to Republicans. We could see Ted Cruz make a surge at some point. especially as the public gets to see and hear more of him. And if what we saw at Liberty University the other day is any indication, he's going to be fine when he's can think on his feet. He doesn't need a prompter. He's not going to need to be rehearsing before a debate. Ron Paul's son, Rand Paul, by the way, who was trailing badly in some of these polls, has now come up into a third-place tie in New Hampshire. So this whole notion that it's going to be Jeb Bush is ridiculous. He may have a lot of money, and he's going to try to use that money to spread messages as he can, as well as he can, to sow doubt about his opponents. But you know what? I think in the long run, people are fed up with same old, which is why I don't think Hillary Clinton is going to be involved after the first few months of the campaign next year. I think she's going to go by the wayside. As somebody said the other day, her moment was 2008. And she couldn't capture it then. What makes you think that she can turn around and get elected president in 2016? Especially now with all of the latest, and I know her friends in media, the Clinton protection team has rushed out there. They're doing whatever they can to drag the gal across the finish line. But I don't think a lot of this is going to work any longer. And somebody mentioned something to me about Ted Cruz the other day. He is portrayed in the media as being an angry, angry man. And in politics, generally, if you're congenial, you get a better response from the voting public. Ronald Reagan was known as a happy warrior, quick-witted when he was out on the campaign trail, friendly smile. But you know what? He also tapped into the public anger with Jimmy Carter and the mess that Carter actually created. If someone like a Ted Cruz can do that, then there's no telling where he's going to end up come Election Day 2016. God willing, and the creek don't rise, I'm back in this chair tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock. Rush Limbaugh is coming up following news at 10 o'clock from Fox. Sean Hannity following the news at 1 o'clock. Glenn Beck, of course, this afternoon at 4. And Dave Ramsey this evening. All of that ahead on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Bill Colley with you on Top Story. Thanks for joining us.